The storm outside had begun just as Marcus pulled into the crumbling driveway of St. Alden's Asylum, a structure long abandoned on the outskirts of town. The building loomed against the lightning-filled sky like a scar left to rot, its windows shattered, roof half collapsed, iron gates hanging open as though inviting him in. Everyone in town whispered about it, about the screams people swore they'd heard on windless nights, about shadows moving behind the cracked glass when no one had been inside for decades. Marcus wasn't there out of curiosity. He was there because of a dare. His friends swore no one could last an entire night inside St. Alden's, but Marcus, tired of their mocking laughter, had finally agreed. He parked, gripping his flashlight like a weapon, and told himself he'd walk out at sunrise as the one who proved them all wrong. Inside, the asylum reeked of mildew and rust. His footsteps crunched over broken tiles, dust puffing up into the damp air. The beam of his flashlight swept over peeling paint, twisted wheelchairs and doors barely hanging on their hinges. The silence was too thick, too heavy, like the air itself was watching him. Every sound seemed to echo, every footstep returned to him as though someone else followed just one pace behind. He paused more than once, turning sharply, but the hall always stood empty. He reached the patient ward where rows of decayed beds stood in skeletal formation. Faded restraints dangled like bones, swaying though the air was still. Lightning lit the room in a sudden flash, and Marcus's breath froze. At the far end of the ward, a pale figure sat hunched on a bed, its head bowed. The light vanished, plunging him into shadow. He blinked, raised his flashlight, but when the beam cut across the beds, the figure was gone. "Just shadows," he muttered, though his voice cracked. "Just shadows." Hours dragged by. The asylum's silence pressed into his skull, gnawing at the edges of his nerves. His watch ticked past midnight when the sound began. Faint, rhythmic, a squeak echoing through the halls. His chest tightened. It was the sound of wheels. His flashlight darted toward the noise, catching the glint of metal. A wheelchair was rolling slowly on its own down the hallway. Marcus's throat went dry, but something compelled him to follow. His shoes echoed against the cracked linoleum as the chair turned a corner and stopped before a door. Marked in rusted letters, Isolation Room 6. The handle was colder than ice when he gripped it. The door groaned, opening into a small, padded chamber. On the floor lay a thin, leather-bound patient file. He crouched, his breath fogging in the freezing air, and flipped it over. His blood ran cold. The name written across the cover was Marcus Elwood, his own. Heart pounding, he tore it open. The pages inside were filled with notes, detailed, clinical, describing a man who looked exactly like him. Pictures showed his face twisted in agony, strapped to a bed. Words scrawled across the paper stabbed into his brain. Subject believes he is free. Must never leave the asylum. A whisper slithered from the corner. "You came back." Marcus spun, his flashlight flickering. When it steadied, the room had changed. The padded walls were no longer decayed. They were clean, white, suffocatingly sterile. The stench of mildew was gone, replaced by the sharp bite of disinfectant. The air vibrated with the sound of locks clicking behind him. He lunged for the door, but the handle was gone. The door itself was gone. Seamless padding surrounded him on all sides. Darkness swallowed his light. He screamed into the void. The noise came then, footsteps shuffling around him, unseen nurses muttering, the squeak of wheels circling the room. Metal clinked as if restraints were being prepared. The whispers grew louder, layering over one another until they formed a chorus. "You never left. You're the last patient." His pulse thundered. He pounded his fists against the wall until his skin tore. But the asylum swallowed every sound. He begged, shouted, wept. But the voices only laughed, echoing with inhuman patience. Time unraveled. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days. Hunger gnawed at him. Thirst scorched his throat. Sometimes he heard children singing lullabies down the halls. Sometimes the padded walls pulsed like a heartbeat. Marcus lost track of time completely. His nails were gone, worn down from scratching at the walls. His voice cracked into a rasp, and still the whispers never left. Outside, the storm passed. Dawn broke, golden light spilling across the town. From the road, St. Alden's looked as dead as ever, quiet, broken, empty. But on the dust-coated desk in the asylum's front office, a new patient file rested neatly at the top of the stack. The name on it was written in fresh ink, Marcus Elwood. And in the silence of Isolation Room 6, if anyone dared to step inside, they would hear faint scratching on the walls. Not from rats, not from the building settling, but from a man who had once walked in, convinced he was free and was still there, begging for someone to believe him.